the challenge that became legend. The sun fell over Hong Kong, painting the game of death film set with golden tones and long shadows. Bruce Lee adjusted his black gi, his defined muscles glistening under a thin layer of sweat. The scene required precision, a choreographed combat against an imaginary opponent, but the energy around it was palpable. Technicians adjusted the cameras, extras whispered, and the director, with megaphone in hand, rehearsed instructions for the last time. It was then that he arrived. A huge man, with shoulders as broad as a bull, pushed through the crowd with a hoarse laugh. It was almost 2 meters tall, and its arms looked like tree trunks. 320 pounds of muscle and swagger, as someone whispered afterwards. He stopped a few steps away from Bruce, crossed his arms and let out a laugh that echoed through the set. "Is that Bruce Lee?" he said, in Cantonese full of mockery. "I heard you're fast. Let's see if it's strong too." The entire set froze. Bruce didn't move, but his dark eyes narrowed, as if calculating every fiber of this giant. The director opened his mouth to intervene, but Bruce raised a hand, asking for silence. He knew what was at stake. It wasn't just a shoot, it was respect. The big man advanced confidently, his fists clenched. Bruce waited, motionless, until the first blow was struck. Then, everything happened in the blink of an eye. The giant's punch cut through the air with a hiss, but Bruce was no longer there. He dodged with a fluid movement, like water running between his fingers, and counterattacked with a sequence so quick that few could keep up. A side kick hit the opponent's knee, causing him to stagger. Before he could recover, Bruce spun around and delivered a sharp blow to the solar plexus, stealing his breath. The big man tried to grab Bruce, but his fingers only found emptiness. An elbow to the ribs made him grunt in pain. Another kick, this time to the thigh, and his legs shook. When he finally fell to his knees, panting, Bruce stopped just inches from his face, his breathing controlled, his body relaxed. "Strength without technique is just violence," said Bruce, in a low voice. "And violence is the refuge of the weak." The giant looked up, his pride hurt, but something in his gaze had changed. There was no more laughter, no more defiance. Just respect. Bruce reached out his hand and helped him up. The set erupted in applause. The director ran over to him, relieved, but Bruce just smiled and went back to his appointment as if nothing had happened. 5 seconds. That was how long it took for the giant to understand that, in front of Bruce Lee, size meant nothing. And that day, amid the heat of Hong Kong, a legend grew a little bigger. Final chapter, the weight of the legend. The following days were a flurry of invitations, interviews, and admiring looks. Bruce Lee had become, overnight, not just an actor, but a symbol. The giant, whose name no one really remembered, disappeared behind the scenes, but his defeat echoed in the studio corridors. Some said he had disappeared from Hong Kong, ashamed. Others, he trained in secret, obsessed with a rematch. Bruce, however, didn't care. He knew that moment was not about victory, but about a lesson that needed to be taught. And learned. It was one muggy night, while walking through the busy streets of Kowloon, that he realized something was wrong. It wasn't the curious looks of passers-by, nor the whispers that followed him. It was the sudden silence that came around him when he passed certain groups. Men in dark suits, impassive faces, watching him from afar. One of them stood out. Tall, thin, with a scar that ran from the corner of his eye to his jaw. He didn't smile, he didn't make any threatening gestures. He just crossed his arms and waited. Bruce stopped. "You're the man who took down the Triad fighter," said the stranger, in perfect Cantonese, but with an accent that didn't belong to the city. "I didn't knock anyone down," Bruce replied, keeping his voice calm. "I just showed him what he already knew." The man laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "The Triad doesn't like lessons. Especially when they come from an outsider." Bruce felt the weight of the words. He knew the reputation of Hong Kong's secret societies, their influence in the studios, in business, in politics. But he had never been involved. Until now. And what does the triad want with me? May you understand that Hong Kong is not Hollywood. Here, the rules are different. Before Bruce could respond, two other men appeared from the shadows, blocking the path. They weren't street fighters, like the giant. They were professionals. They moved with precision, hands relaxed but ready. Bruce didn't back down. If you want to teach me something, then teach me. The man with the scar smiled. It won't be a lesson. It will be a warning. The first blow came quickly, a punch straight to the face. Bruce dodged on instinct, feeling the wind pass near his temple. The second attacker advanced with a knee, but Bruce spun around, using his opponent's momentum against himself. A roundhouse kick hit the man in the chest, sending him crashing into a wall. The one with the scar didn't move. Just watched. Impressive technique. But that's not what will save you today. Suddenly, more men appeared from the alleys. 5, 10, maybe more. Bruce knew he couldn't beat them all. But I also knew I didn't need to. He positioned himself, taking a deep breath, and waited. The first to attack was a man with a knife. Bruce dodged the blow, grabbed his wrist and twisted it until he heard the bone crack. The scream was muffled by a punch to the stomach. Another opponent came from behind, trying for a choke. Bruce ducked, throwing him over his shoulder, and threw him at one of his companions. But there were many. A kick hit his ribs. Another knocked him to the ground. Bruce tried to get up, but a foot stepped on his chest, trapping him. The man with the scar approached, holding a thin blade. You're good. But it's not invincible. Bruce looked at him, sweat running down his face, chest heaving. No one is. The knife came down. But it didn't hit him. A bang echoed through the street. Glass shattered. Screams. The sound of running footsteps. Bruce looked up and saw the triad men scattering, fleeing in all directions. In the midst of the confusion, a familiar figure appeared. He was the director of the film. And behind him, a dozen police officers. Bruce! Shouted the director, running towards him. Are you well? Bruce stood up, wiping the blood from his lip. I am. The scarred man looked at him one last time before disappearing into the crowd. This isn't over. Bruce didn't respond. I knew it was true. Epilogue, The Legacy. In the months that followed, Bruce Lee became a star. His films broke records, his fighting philosophy inspired millions, and his fame crossed oceans. But Hong Kong never stopped being a dangerous place for him. The triad has not forgotten. One night, while returning home from a recording, Bruce found an envelope left on his door. Inside, a single photo, him, on the film set, surrounded by men in dark suits. And a handwritten message. You may be quick. But we are patient. Bruce burned the photo. Not out of fear. But because I knew that, at some point, I would have to face that. And when he did, it wouldn't be with words. That was how, years later, when he was already a global legend, Bruce Lee returned to Hong Kong. Not for filming. Not to teach. To finish what had started. And when he did, no one else dared to challenge him. Because, in the end, the legend wasn't about size. It was about what a man could do when he had nothing left to lose. The Last Dragon. Hong Kong was buzzing in the damp early morning fog when Bruce landed at Kai Tak Airport. There were no fans, no reporters, not even a car waiting for him. Just the weight of the past, dragging itself like a shadow through the narrow streets of Kowloon. He didn't wear the impeccable suits of movie moguls, nor the tracksuits that made him famous. He wore a simple black jacket, cotton pants, and worn sneakers, enough to move around without being noticed. Or so I thought. The triad didn't take long to find him. On the first night, while walking through an alley near Man Mo Temple, 3 men blocked his way. They weren't the suit-wearing henchmen from the old photo. They were young, agile, with scars on their knuckles and curved knives hidden in their sleeves. The leader, a blank-eyed boy named Lao, smiled. Did the dragon return to die in its own nest? Bruce didn't respond. He just adjusted his posture, feet slightly apart, hands relaxed at his sides. Lao attacked first, a knife cutting through the air towards his throat. Bruce dodged it with minimal movement, as if the blade had passed through him without touching him. The second blow came from behind, but he was already spinning, his elbow hitting his attacker's chin with a sharp crack. The third man tried to kick him, but Bruce grabbed his ankle and threw him against the brick wall, where he collapsed, unconscious. Lao stepped back, eyes wide. Who the hell are you? Bruce wiped a drop of blood from his lip. Someone who doesn't forget. The attacks became more frequent. They were no longer just messages or threats, they were actual attempts to kill him. A sniper on the roof of a building in Central, poison in the tea at a restaurant in Wan Chai, an ambush with 10 men armed with iron batons on the Aberdeen pier. Bruce faced them without weapons, using only what he had perfected over the years: speed, precision, the ability to anticipate each movement before it was even made. But the triad wasn't stupid. They knew that one man, no matter how fast he was, could not win a war alone. It was then that they found his weak point. Linda was at home in Seattle when she got the call. A distorted, almost robotic voice said only, "Your husband is playing with fire. And fire burns everything." She hung up, her heart pounding, and called the studio in Hong Kong. Nobody answered. He called the hotel where Bruce was staying. Nothing. The next day, a package arrived at his door. Inside, a cassette tape and a photo of Brandon, then just 7 years old, playing in his grandparents' backyard. The message was clear. Bruce knew as soon as he stepped into the airport back in the United States. There was no more time for games. The last battle didn't take place in a dark alley or an abandoned warehouse. It was in an industrial warehouse on the outskirts of Hong Kong, a place chosen by the Triad as his tomb. They had gathered their best men, Muay Thai fighters, ex-military men, even a Wing Chun master who had been bribed to face him. And, at the center of it all, the leader of the Triad, a man named Wong, who had waited decades for this moment. "You've always been a thorn in my side," Li, Wong said, lighting a cigarette. "But thorns can be plucked." Bruce didn't say anything. He just looked at the clock. Brandon would be safe in 2 hours. That was all that mattered. The fight started without warning. The men advanced in waves, punches, kicks, bladed weapons cutting the air. Bruce moved like water, flowing between attacks, breaking bones with precise blows, disarming opponents with quick twists. But there were many. And, no matter how fast it was, the fatigue began to take its toll. Wong watched everything from a raised platform, smiling. "You're good. But you're not immortal." It was then that Bruce saw the opening. Wong was distracted, giving orders to his men. In a move that seemed impossible, Bruce jumped, grabbing a metal beam, and kicked Wong with all his strength. The Triad leader flew backwards, falling off the platform and hitting his head on the concrete floor. The silence that followed was deafening. The remaining men backed away, eyes wide. Some fled. Others dropped their weapons. Bruce approached Wong, who was coughing blood, trying to get up. "You can't win," he muttered. Bruce crouched down beside him. "I've already won. Because you're still on the ground. And I'm standing." Wong tried to spit at him, but he didn't have the strength. Bruce stood up and looked at the remaining men. "Tell whoever sent you that the dragon is no longer hungry." The next day, Hong Kong newspapers reported a gang war in the industrial district. Bodies were found, but none identified. Nobody mentioned Bruce Lee. Nobody needed to. He returned home. And, for the first time in years, he slept peacefully. The weight of silence. Bruce closed the apartment door carefully, as if the slightest noise could break the stillness that finally enveloped him. The air smelled of incense and furniture wax, an absurd contrast to the smell of gunpowder and sweat that still clung to his skin. He took off his shoes, left his jacket on the back of the chair and walked to the bedroom. The bed was made, the sheets were spotless, as if Linda had guessed he would return. She was sitting in the armchair by the window, reading a book. When he saw it, he closed it slowly, marking the page with one finger. "I didn't say anything. It didn't need to." Her eyes, dark and attentive, roamed his face, the cuts on his knuckles, the purple bruise that formed on his temple. Bruce waited for a question, an accusation, a request for an explanation. But Linda just got up, went to the bathroom and filled a basin with warm water. He came back with a clean towel and a bottle of alcohol. "Sit down," he said, pointing to the bed. He obeyed. She worked in silence, cleaning the wounds with a precision he recognized as the same precision she used in training. When he was finished, he applied ointment to the cuts and covered them with gauze. Bruce grabbed her hand before she walked away. "Aren't you going to ask?" Linda sighed, sitting down next to him. "I already know." She touched his face, her fingers light as a breeze. "You did what you needed to do. What if I didn't have to? Then I wouldn't have come back like this." Bruce closed his eyes. The weight of the last few days crashed down on him all at once, the ambush in the alley, the sound of Wong's blade tearing through the air, the crack of bone as his kick connected with the man's temple. And, worst of all, the certainty that, if he had hesitated, he would have been on the ground, bleeding to death. "They won't stop," he murmured. "Wong was just a pawn." "I know. What if they come after you? From Brandon?" Linda held his face with both hands, forcing him to look at her. "Then we're leaving. To the United States. Anywhere. But you can't live like that, Bruce. Always looking over his shoulder, always waiting for the next blow." He wanted to argue, to say that there was no choice, that their world was made of men like Wong, that violence was the only language they understood. But the words died in his throat. Because deep down, he knew she was right. "I don't know how to be anything else," he admitted. Linda smiled sadly. "You are a teacher. A father. A man who makes people laugh with his films." She kissed his forehead. "You just forgot about it." The last warning. 3 days later, Bruce received an envelope with no return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper with a handwritten message. "The dragon may not be hungry, but the tiger is still awake." He burned the note in the bathroom sink, watching the flames consume the words until only ash remained. I knew who had sent it. The same man who had financed Wong, who controlled Hong Kong's docks with an iron fist and who now saw Bruce as a threat to be eliminated. That night he didn't sleep. He sat on the porch, listening to the distant noise of the boats in the harbor, the murmur of the waves hitting the concrete pillars. He thought about Linda, about Brandon, about the future they could have if he just turned his back and walked away. He thought about all the students who were waiting for him in the studio, about all the lives he had touched with his words, his movements, his philosophy. And he thought about himself. In the boy who had grown up on the streets of Kowloon, being beaten by bigger gangs, learning to defend himself not out of hate, but out of necessity. In the young man who had left Hong Kong in search of something greater, only to discover that the world outside was also made of shadows. In the man who, now, was tired of fighting. But tiredness was not weakness. It was clarity. The decision. The next morning, Bruce went to the studio. The students were already there, spread out across the mat, stretching in silence. When he entered, everyone turned around. Some smiled, relieved. Others looked down, as if they knew something had changed. "There will be no training today," he announced. A murmur ran through the group. He raised his hand, asking for silence. "I'm leaving. From Hong Kong. Maybe forever." The faces closed. Some protested, others were in shock. One of the older students, a man named Chen, stepped forward. Sifu, you can't. We need you. Bruce smiled, sadly. You don't need me. You need each other. He pointed to the group. Jeet Kune Do is not about strikes or techniques. It's about freedom. About finding your own path. I only showed the door. Now, you have to cross it. Chen opened his mouth to argue, but Bruce stopped him with a gesture. I've already decided. He turned to leave, but before he could reach the door, a voice called out to him. And the tiger? Bruce stopped. He looked over his shoulder. He was one of the youngest students, a boy no more than 17, with wide eyes and shaking hands. What about him? What are you going to do with him? Bruce took a deep breath. For a moment, he considered lying. Saying he didn't know, that it wasn't his problem. But the truth was simple, and he was tired of running from it. I'm going to kill him. The studio was silent. Nobody moved. No one dared to breathe. Not today, Bruce continued. Not even tomorrow. But one day. When he least expects it. Because that's how you hunt a tiger. And then he left, leaving behind the echo of his own words. The hunt. He didn't leave immediately. First, he went to the port. Not to run away, but to observe. The men in suits who circulated between the containers, the furtive glances, the hands that hid in their pockets whenever a police car passed by. Bruce studied them for days, memorizing faces, schedules, routines. He learned that the man he was looking for, the Real Tiger, never appeared in public. That his subordinates called him Lao Hu, the old tiger, and that he was afraid of water. On the 5th day, Bruce followed one of the henchmen to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts. Inside, among boxes of stolen goods, he found what he was looking for, a safe. Not just any safe, but an old, reinforced model, the kind that can only be opened with dynamite or the right combination. He didn't have dynamite. But he was patient. The trap. That night, Bruce came home with a plan. Linda was waiting for him in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. When she saw him, she immediately knew something was wrong. You're not leaving, are you? He shook his head. Not yet. She dropped the knife. The blade clanked against the cutting board. Bruce. I need to do this. For us. No. You need to do this for yourself. Linda dried her hands on her apron, her eyes shining. And I won't stop you. But I'm also not going to sit here waiting, wondering if you'll come back. Bruce felt a lump in his throat. What are you saying? Brandon and I are going to Seattle. My sister is there. We'll stay with her until you sort this out. He wanted to argue, to say that it was too dangerous, that she couldn't just leave. But I knew she was right. And deep down, I knew it was the only way to protect them. When are you going? Tomorrow. Bruce closed his eyes. When he opened them, Linda was right in front of him, her hands on his face. Come back to us, he whispered. He kissed her, hard, as if it were his last kiss. But it wasn't. It was a promise. The Tiger Falls. Old Tiger was not an easy man to find. Bruce spent 2 weeks following their tracks, discovering their hiding places, waiting for the right moment. Until, one rainy night, the moment arrived. The tiger was alone. His car, a black, armored Mercedes, stopped in front of an exclusive restaurant in the Central District. The driver got out, opened the door for him, and the old man got out, adjusting his silk suit. Bruce watched him from afar, hidden in the shadows. He saw when the tiger entered the restaurant, he saw when the lights came on the second floor, where the private office was. He didn't have a gun. It didn't need to. He climbed the back stairs, silent as a cat. The office door was ajar. Inside, old Tiger was talking on the phone, with his back to the entrance. Tell them the shipment leaves tomorrow. And if anyone touches a strand of my nephew's hair, I'll kill them all. Bruce pushed the door open with his foot. The creak made the old man turn around. When he saw him, his eyes widened, but he showed no fear. He just hung up the phone and smiled. I was wondering when you would show up. Bruce entered, closing the door behind him. You sent the note. I sent. Old Tiger sat behind the table, crossing his legs. And you responded by coming here. Brave. Or stupid. It depends on your point of view. The old man laughed, a dry, joyless sound. You know you're not going to get out of here alive, right? Bruce shrugged. Perhaps. But neither do you. For a moment, the two faced each other, measuring strength. Then, Old Tiger sighed and opened the desk drawer. Bruce already expected this. When the man's hand emerged holding a pistol, he was already on the move. The first kick hit the old man's wrist, sending the weapon flying away. The second hit him in the chest, knocking him against the wall. The old tiger tried to get up, but Bruce was faster. He grabbed him by the collar and threw him onto the table, knocking papers and glasses onto the floor. You killed Wong, growled the old man, panting. He killed my men. Why? Because you left me no choice. There is always a choice. Bruce squeezed his neck, feeling his pulse racing under his fingers. Not for me. Old Tiger tried to break free, but Bruce was stronger. Faster. More ruthless. When the man's eyes began to roll back, when his breathing became a hoarse hiss, Bruce loosened his grip. Why are you doing this? Asked the old man, his voice broken. You're not like us. Bruce looked at him, at the fear in the eyes of the man who had terrorized Hong Kong for decades. And for the first time, he felt sorry. I know, he said. That's why I have to finish you. And then he pressed the end of the dragon. When he left the restaurant, the rain had stopped. The air was clean, thick with the smell of wet earth. Bruce walked through the empty streets, hands in his pockets, his body light as if a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He didn't regret it. He didn't feel guilty. Just relief. When he got home, Linda and Brandon were already gone. On the kitchen table, he found a note. We're waiting for you. Don't delay. Bruce folded the paper and put it in his pocket. Then he went to his room and picked up a suitcase. Inside, he put some clothes, his workout diaries, a photo of Linda and Brandon smiling on the beach. Before leaving, he stopped at the door and looked back at the apartment that had been his refuge. He thought about all the moments he spent there, the laughs, the fights, the sleepless nights training in the room. Then he closed the door. And he didn't look back.